Cynthia Nixon is a true progressive who refuses to take corporate PAC money. Her platform has some of the most incredible proposals that I've seen. And one of the things that stood out to me about Cynthia, aside from her incredible platform, was the way she handled the one and only debate that Andrew Cuomo, the incumbent, agreed to do. So Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Anna, so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get to your policy proposals and what you're running on, I do really want to give our audience a sense of how incredibly strong you were during this debate with Andrew Cuomo. We'll discuss it a little bit after we watch the clip. Take a look.
Campaign finance reform is something that Governor Cuomo has been promising ever since he ran in 2010. It's not hard to know how to do campaign finance reform. It's to close the LLC loophole by which corporations can donate an unlimited amount of money to political campaigns. But since taking office, Governor Cuomo has received $16 million through the LLC loophole. That's more than every single legislator in Albany combined.
What I loved about that clip was not only how strong you were, but how it was a consistent theme, a consistent message that you weaved into this debate. And Cuomo really appeared to underestimate you. He came a little unprepared, and you really came out with the big guns, and it was fantastic to see that.
Well, thank you. I think Governor Cuomo spent a lot of time preparing for the debate. His people even bragged about how much he was preparing for it. And in fact, you know, we've been asking for him for two debates, one upstate and one downstate, since I entered the room. We had accepted offers from a couple of different channels, but unbeknownst to us, he had been negotiating on his own with the one debate that we ended up doing. So he actually had a lot of time to prepare, whereas we had about 2.5 weeks notice, and we got to set none of the conditions of the debate. But I think the fact of the matter is he's really not very good on his feet, and he's really not very good at defending his record. He hasn't been in a one-on-one debate in 12 years, and he doesn't have a progressive record to run on. So when somebody actually calls him on the facts, he doesn't have a lot to say. He doesn't have a lot of ways to defend himself because he talks like a Democrat, but he has certainly governed like a Republican, and he's handed over massive amounts of power to the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
And that's his record.
Well, I feel like when you have the facts on your side, debates are actually pretty easy. And you did certainly have the facts on your side. You know, you represent yourself as a true progressive, whereas Andrew Cuomo claims he's on the left, but his policies prove otherwise. So let's get to some of your proposals and how much they differ from what Cuomo has done and says he's willing to do. So first off, healthcare is a big issue in the United States, and you really want to push for a single-payer healthcare system in the state of New York. A lot of people are dismissive about that, and the first thing you hear is, how are you going to pay for it? Now, I'm not one of those people. I know how it gets paid for, but for the sake of this conversation, tell me the specifics about your policy proposal here. How would you pay for it?
Sure. So the thing about transitioning to a Medicare for all single payer system is the transition costs a lot of money, but actually it's an enormous savings, not only to the state of New York, not only to individuals, but to employers. And of course, it means we insure every person. We insure them better, cheaper, without copays, without deductibles. And I am supportive of the New York Health Act, which would bring us a Medicare for all single payer system in New York. Governor Cuomo at the debate said, oh, we need to wait for the federal government to do it, which I think is exactly the opposite. I think we need to show in individual states that we can do it and gain momentum that way. But in terms of how we would pay for it, we would pay for it through a combination of a payroll tax and other taxes on things like capital gains. And it's the fact of the matter is it will come out of people's paychecks, and 98% of New Yorkers will pay substantially less for their health care than they do now. And they will be better insured. Not only will you be able to access the health care you do now, but people will be much more likely to access diagnostic care and preventative care. Everything will be covered, from dental to vision to mental health and even medical devices, and it will drive healthcare costs down 40% because the healthcare industry and big pharma will only be negotiating with one entity, and that's the state of New York. And so the state of New York then has incredible bargaining power. And because employers will no longer be responsible for providing health care for their employees, it's actually a tremendous job creator. It's estimated that 200,000 jobs will be created in New York because of the extra revenue that employers will have to hire people.
So, considering the fact that you refuse to take corporate PAC money, it's clear that you are unwilling to allow corporate interests to corrupt you. But there are certainly local politicians in the state of New York that you would have to work with to accomplish your goals who are getting paid by these corporations, particularly pharmaceutical companies, the private healthcare industry. What is your plan to get these politicians on your side? How do you get them to rally in support of your proposal?
Well, like any real foundational change, and obviously providing a Medicare for all single payer system would be an enormous foundational change. The groundswell has to come from the people, and it's a practical issue, but even more so, it's a moral issue. And you galvanize public support, and there is already so much public support in New York for this, as there is across the country. It's something that politicians are afraid of because it's complicated and they fear that it's expensive. They know that on the other end of it, there's tens of millions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in savings, but they're scared about how to get there. But I think one of the things you have to understand is, when I unseat Governor Cuomo, it will be completely game-changing in Albany, and people will understand that they have to get on board, or they're going to be next. That it's a new era in Albany, where actually voters and New Yorkers are determining what the agendas of our New York government should be, not corporations. Look at what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory did. What an earthquake that was. Just imagine what it will be like in New York when I unseat Andrew Cuomo.
Right. I mean, we're crossing our fingers. And for those of you who do live in New York, who have the ability to vote, the primary elections in the state of New York will take place on Thursday. So please get out there, get active, please vote.
Right. It's not a Tuesday. Election is usually on a Tuesday, but because of Rosh Hashanah and because of September 11th this year, it's on a Thursday. We need everybody to turn out. That's how we're going to win.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to move forward to discuss a little bit of the problem regarding affordable housing in the state of New York. I live in Los Angeles, California. We're having a crisis here when it comes to homelessness and affordable housing. Just to give our audience a few numbers, in the last 8 years, homelessness in New York surged by 36% to over 89,000 people living on the streets in New York. That number will go up to 100,000 by 2020 if nothing is done. So what is your proposal in combating this issue? Because it is a huge problem, not just in the state of New York, throughout the country. And I think that lawmakers are looking for real solutions to it. Yes,
well, but I think the other problem is that lawmakers are very, at least in New York State, incredibly indebted to the real estate industry, who give them millions and sometimes tens of millions of dollars between landlords and corporate developers. Andrew Cuomo's received $2 million just in the last year from the real estate industry. And that's the real problem, right? It's not that we don't know what the solutions are to preserving affordable housing and to expanding affordable housing, is that we don't have the political will to do it because our governor and our legislators are bought off. So in terms of, we have rent regulation here, which only applies to buildings of more than 5 units that were built up to the year 1974. And there are all kinds of loopholes that have been punched in these rent regulations by the power of the real estate industry. Things like the vacancy decontrol, a magic number 2733, which an apartment hits that number and all of a sudden that apartment is no longer rent regulated. Like the vacancy bonus, that every time you change tenants, you're allowed to raise the rent 20%. MCIs, major capital improvements, how you can tack money onto the rent when you make an improvement, but that improvement never gets paid off. That's just a new part of the rent. And preferential rent, I mean, there are all of these loopholes. So first of all, we need to close these loopholes. We need to get rid of this magic number, which not only allows landlords to hike up the rent, it actually incentivizes them to do that and to kick people out so that they can have their vacancy bonus. Mm-hmm. So we need to close all these loopholes. We need to make it apply to buildings after 1974 too. Absolutely. And we need to spread it across the state. It only exists in 8 counties downstate, mostly around New York City. And we need rent regulation across the state, because the fact of the matter is gentrification is pushing people out of the homes and the communities in which they've lived for decades across the state. And we have a housing crisis everywhere. And we have a governor whose biggest benefactors are the real estate industry. And these two facts are inexorably linked to each other.
Cynthia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us about your policy proposals. I can talk to you about this stuff all day, but you are a strong supporter of public education. You are the product of public education in New York. Your children receive public education in the state of New York. I love that you want to strengthen that as well. And
yes, that's how I got into politics, is fighting for better funding and particularly more equal funding for public schools for the last 17 years. Because our schools are the second most unequally funded in the entire country. And the fact of the matter is we're violating the constitutional rights of so many of the children of New York by spending so little on their education that they can't possibly receive the sound basic education they're guaranteed by our state constitution. The highest court in New York has said that, and that's what I've been fighting on for 17 years, that we need to invest $4.2 billion in our schools. Andrew Cuomo isn't going to put it in. That's why I'm running.
I love it. Well, you can learn more about Cynthia Nixon's campaign by going to her website, cynthiafornewyork.com. And you can also volunteer at cynthiafornewyork.com/volunteer-2. And please, if you're in New York, get involved, vote, go out there. Again, the election takes place this week on Thursday. So don't get confused. Make sure you don't fall for any misinformation out there. Thursday is when the election takes place. Go out there and vote. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure talking to you.